now over the past year or so.
Sorry.
Thank you. No, that's okay as well. So I guess the first thing to say is that when a sponsor makes a decision to come to Australia to undertake their clinical trial, they do it because of the value proposition we offer in Australia, the fair and very fast regulatory system where there's no IND required, the exchange rate advantage, and of course the generous 43.5% exchange rate. But on top of that, if we can then de-risk somewhat their project for them, that is adding super value. And by working with TrialKey, when a potential client or even a new client sends us their synopsis or their protocol, we can then run it through and work with the TrialKey folks, run it through their algorithms to add better value about how they can improve their proposed clinical trial, their planned project, to de-risk that. Whether it's inclusion-exclusion criteria, whether it's the sites that they're using, the number of participants. So basically, the process is to de-risk what they're trying to do using the TrialKey, and of course also our networks, but really focusing on what we're talking about today. It's right from that start, not just having our team review the protocol in question and using their experience and expertise, but using the TrialKey algorithms as well. I might leave it there, and Minh-Thu, if you wanted to add anything as well.
No, I think you covered that very, very well.
Thank you.
Minh-Thu, how does TrialKey use AI-powered biostatistical validation to refine clinical trial protocols for success?
Thanks, Bernice. So like Tina said, everything we do in line with subject matter experts from Alithia. We're very lucky to be partnered with Alithia. They've got so much experience, on average, 20 years of experience per person. The way our AI algorithm works is it's based on a proprietary data set of over 450,000 clinical trials. And what we were able to figure out is that if we looked for 1,300 variables in every single trial and we simulated the trial 100,000 times, we could predict with an accuracy of 92% whether a trial would meet its primary endpoints or not. And what this means is we can actually work backwards. When we receive a protocol from a client, we run it through our algorithm. Our algorithm simulates it 100,000 times. And what that means is, say, for something like enrollment, let's say you had 400 patients, we would increase that to 500, 600, 700, see what happens, decrease it to 300, 200, and see what happens. And what we could do is we could figure out the exact marginal impact that every variable has on the probability of that trial meeting its outcomes. And this also comes into play, like Tina said, with site selection as well. So we use something called Shapley values, and what we do is we would assign an impact score or a percentage score for each site, and that would be based on the site's experience, what it's done historically, whether it's in a certain phase that it's great at, or in certain disease states as well. If it's a site that focuses mainly on vaccines, all of that comes into play. So it means that we can just really refine clinical trial protocols and optimize them.
From the start, right? That's the beauty. It's before you've spent any money, made the big commitment, and on top of all the other value proposition of coming to Australia.
And it's a lot harder to do that, moving through the process. Yeah.
Tina, what are some key operational bottlenecks you've observed during trial execution, and how does Alithia address them?
Yeah, so one of the things, thank you, Bernice. One of the things we do as well as using TrialKey is to try and de-risk the project from the start. So it's about planning for the project, planning for success, where the devil, I always say the devil is in the details. So right from the start, we would use TrialKey to run the protocol through their algorithms, which then feeds out, site selection. One of the main bottlenecks, I guess, is site selection. And in our experience, because we've been involved, we're veterans, we're not old, we say we're veterans, and we have an average of 20 years industry experience across the group. We do have an amazing network Part of that network includes clinical trial networks, which is very unique to Australia. And whether it's in stroke or Alzheimer's disease or ALS, motor neuron disease, or some of the rarer diseases, it's really important not only to run the protocol through these the trial key network algorithms, but also to run it through our advocacy groups and our clinical trial networks. They will clearly, we have great relationships with many of them. And they will clearly take a look at the protocol really quickly and clearly for us, and state what could be improved also in terms of inclusion-exclusion criteria. It may be something that is a standard practice in the US, for example, that's in the current protocol, but may not be such standard practice. So that's one of the bottlenecks to make sure that we select the appropriate sites. The other bottlenecks that we commonly see that preclude us from starting our first patient first visit as per plan is availability of investigational product into Australia. Now, unlike some other jurisdictions, Australia doesn't have, we don't need a qualified person, we don't need anything super special to bring product or investigational product generally into Australia. We do have a lovely network of various drug depots that we use, but it's really important to start those conversations right from the start, as soon as we are awarded the project, as soon as we start selecting the sites, as soon as we start ethics, to start that process as well, because sometimes there can be bottlenecks of investigational product supply. One of those bottlenecks is often that the label also in Australia is a little bit different to what it may be in the US and Europe. For example, we need an expiry date, and to take those factors into consideration right from the very start means that there's less likelihood of pushing out logistical timelines and bringing product into the country. So that's one, site, or two, I should say, product and site selection, and then recruitment plan as well. And I think we're going to talk about recruitment further down the track, but would you like me to talk about that now, or we can talk about that further down the track?
Oh, you can cover it now. We'll just skip
Yes.
that other question.
Yes, that's okay. Yes, of course, recruitment. For many of the companies that we work with, particularly in the small to medium biotechnology and device space, it is their first shot, their only shot usually, of getting their clinical trial right. They've raised a certain amount of money, they've got their preclinical information together, they're putting their faith in all of us in the community here in Australia to actually get this project right for them. So, of course, recruitment is really important. We start the conversation about recruitment from day one as well. And day one means to us when we first start talking to the client, even before we've been awarded the project. So we'll reach out again to our network to do high-level feasibility. Sometimes it's a more in-depth feasibility for them so that we can get historical information about each of the sites. And I guess selection of sites also depends whether they have the bandwidth to undertake that project, whether they see the type of patients that are needed within a certain time point to be recruited, but also what other avenues there are. Is it, does this program that they're planning warrant a social media strategy? Does it warrant radio advertising? Does it warrant that we actually have more site management involved day to day in the day-to-day operations of running the study, so that we have a really close relationship with the sites and support them in anything they may do to bring participants into the project? So they're just my initial thoughts around the importance of them. The main bottlenecks we see were recruitment. Also, I should say the startup process is very important as well. So one of the main advantages of undertaking a clinical trial in Australia is that we have what's called a national mutual acceptance system, which means that we have a lead site. Someone can, if it's a multi-site study, we can take on, one of the sites can take a lead site role, and they do all the paperwork and they have approval for ethics. And then once that's undertaken, the other sites will accept that ethics approval and just undertake contracting and governance. But to put a plan in place before we undertake that. Once we select the sites, of which ethics committee we will choose, the timelines that are involved, so that we're setting expectations with the sites as well, and starting that contract negotiation and collection of essential documents from day one is super important. Otherwise, it can be a bottleneck, especially with some of the bigger public hospitals in Australia taking a little bit more time for contracting, which we also call governance here. So I might stop there to let Minh-Thu have a chat as well.
All good. Minh-Thu, how does CHILD-KEY's preliminary report help CROs and sponsors strengthen their RFPs and win more projects?
Thanks, Bernice. Thanks, Tina. And absolutely, we're very lucky that we work alongside Alithia, and they've got such strong relationships within this industry, because leveraging those relationships is so important when you come to challenges where you need experience in different areas of the industry. So our preliminary report is completely free, and what it includes, it has something we call a success distribution graph in it. And what that means is when we receive a protocol from Alithia, what we'll do is we'll run that through our algorithm. It'll look for those 1,000 variables, and what it'll do is it'll simulate it 100,000 times, and it'll come up with a score. And that score might be, right now, with this protocol, your probability of success of meeting your primary endpoints, whatever they may be, let's say it's an efficacy endpoint, is 40%, and you are currently in the 60th percentile. So it'll show that, and it will also say, after making actionable insights that our algorithm recommends, then your probability of success score goes from 40% to 52%, and your percentile goes from the 60th percentile to the 85th percentile. And what it also has in it is a competitive analysis. And what that means is our algorithm will look for 40 or 50 of the closest current running clinical trials to your trial. And what it'll do is it'll simulate each of those ones 100,000 times too, and give them a score as well. And so you can say, you know, right now, our one's at 40%, our competitor's one, it looks to be, it's at 35%. And what we'll also do is we'll map it out on a timeline. So then you can see these are all the competitive trials happening, the active trials happening in the same phase, in the same condition. And right now, those ones look like they're going to finish at the end of 2025. It looks like our one's going to finish mid-2026. It's just a really good tool for benchmarking. And the last thing that our free preliminary reports include is a technology breakdown. So what that is it will say, right now, in this space that you're researching, these are all of the different technologies, whether they're different classes of drugs or different classes of device. These are all the technologies that are being used in this phase, in this particular disease state. And we'll map it out on a visual graph. So then you can see if it's a really big box, it means that there's a lot of research being undertaken in that particular technology right now. And it'll also be colored with a key. So you can see right now, let's say we're looking at depression, SSRIs, there's a lot of studies happening in there. And we can also see that the probability of success for a SSRI isn't as high as an SNRI. So it just means that everything's broken down by technology. And what this preliminary report allows our partners to do is Alithia can go to the sponsor and say, look, we're working with CHILD-KEY right now. They've used AI to simulate your trial 100,000 times. And these are some valuable insights that we can give you. We can get your trial from 40% to 52%. And you could potentially save X, Y, Z. So using Alithia's expertise and, you know, using their high-level feasibility, they will be able to let us know that, you know, right now, these are where you can make changes and you could potentially save this much money. And we've used AI to simulate the trial. So it just gives another top-level amount of information that's quite valuable.
Yeah, I think we have a question from Alyssa, but yeah, that's okay. Before Alyssa, I was just going to say we have definitely used that as I guess a competitive advantage for our clients, because we are, you know, it's all about their success is our success, of course, as well. And we want them to succeed. We want every single trial to succeed. So if we can already advise them and send them, you know, a report on competitive advantages and how they can easily change their protocols, whether it's take out an inclusion-exclusion criteria, add one in, increase the number of sites, things to do easily and cost effectively as well is we've already used that, as you know, Minh-Thu and Bernice, in several of our projects. But I'm going to stop there because I think Alyssa
put these together. Tina, how does Alithia reduce patient burden and improve engagement during trial execution?
So this is a more general question, but absolutely, again, it's going back to working with our specialised sites, the sites that we know very well. But these days, it's gone are the days where a particular patient in a clinical trial would come in once a month. We would give them a bottle of, the site, I would say, of course, would give them a bottle of tablets or a bottle, capsules, and they would come back and fill in a diary. So these days, one of the ways that sites particularly, and the way we work with sites, to decrease the patient burden. And can I say that as well, that we are also living in a time where more and more is expected from that one a clinical trial where we're collecting diaries, where we're using wearables to do 24/7 data, we're collecting CSF samples, we're undertaking imaging, we're doing all sorts of, some of the studies we work on, for example, it's an 8-hour study visit. So it's a huge patient burden. And one of the ways we routinely work with clients now, we are very lucky in Australia to have some of the big organisations, but also more boutique, just like Alithia. I guess the equivalent is home visits for the participants. So that's one way, especially not for the pivotal visits, but the in-between visits, so that we can set up, we will go to the participants. So that means that we are taking the study to them, and whilst it adds cost, it means that we have more patient compliance and that the patient burden is decreased. It's very commonplace as well to use telehealth visits, telemedicine, of course, that many of us probably since COVID particularly use GP visits, and you don't have to go in to see the GP necessarily every single time. Yes, it's about reminding the participants via electronic means, via reminders on their phone and other phone calls and phones to when they need to do certain things, whether it's to take medication, but those sorts of measures. So making it easier, particularly for the participant, to be involved in a clinical trial, which ultimately leads to better data quality, and also means that the participant's more likely to stay in a particular clinical trial. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
Yeah. So to prevent that, the issue from happening again, Minh-Thu actually can't turn on her video as I've turned off the video for
That's okay. That's all right. That's fine.
It's okay. We're here. It's all good.
I can go faceless. Everyone knows what my face looks like from LinkedIn, even though that is an AI generated photo. Yes, I agree completely with Tina. We're seeing a lot more decentralized clinical trials now as well, which allow for a lot of remote participation and data collection, and also a lot more in the wearable devices and digital health tools, which is actually great because it means that a lot of those measurements, as long as the technology behind it is sound, we can get those measurements straight away. And it means that any human error for inputting all that isn't a problem anymore. And what Tina said about patient touch points as well, that's something that we can help optimize using TrialKey. So what we do is we find the correct optimal range of patient touch points, but we don't just talk about how many touch points. We also look at the frequency, whether it should be every 2 months, every 4 months. Where do we see probability of success increase with frequency, and also the type of touch points, whether it's going to be best in person or by phone. Obviously, all this does depend on the condition you're looking at, but also we'd sit down with a subject matter expert from the CRO side and discuss, what do you think? This is what the data's come up with. What do you think? And we'll work together to find the best combination for touch points.
Yeah, and might I also add that one of the other amazing things that exist these days is actually shipping investigational product directly to the participant as well. They don't necessarily have to come in and pick up that medication, and that's a seamless pathway now.
Yeah.
And it doesn't suit all studies, but for a lot of studies it does suit as well. So these are all the things that we will plan right from the start of a project as well, taking into account when we need to set these up, the cost, and the advantage, I guess, of course, to the actual project itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Open question to both of you. What role does competitor benchmarking and the technology landscape analysis play in improving trial design?
Yeah, I can start off. Minh-Thu, would you like to go or yeah?
Sure. So I spoke about the competitor benchmarking and technology landscape before, and how it shows our, 40 to 50 closest competitors when we analyze the protocol, and it just maps them out so we can see benchmarking. But what it really does is it helps identify best practices. What we're looking at is determining what's been done well in a certain phase, in a certain disease state, what's been done well in the past, and how do you replicate the best aspects of each trial design. And it also allows us to highlight gaps and pinpoint areas where a certain trial design might be lacking compared to competitors, and allowing it to improve. And also just allows for better planning, strategic planning, and better positioning as well, just to get that competitive edge. Yeah, on to you, Tina.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the olden days, I guess if you want for want of a better term, we'd always check clinicaltrials.gov, and we still do, and the ANZ CTR to see what other competitive trials are undertaking, because that, then we have to take into account, well, if there's a lot of competition, is this feasible to be undertaken in Australia, for example? Do we need to increase the number of sites? When do we need time for this project? So that's all really important in terms of budgeting, in terms of time, not only cost, but of course time of when you're going to undertake your study, because patients are precious. They're not only precious because they're giving up themselves to take part in this research they may or may not benefit from, but of course they could be competitively precious because there are other projects ongoing. So it's really important up front to understand what the landscape is looking like in terms of what else is going on in that space. And it also means for our clients, they don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel, because they can also get competitive information about how that study has been undertaken in the various regions of the world, and the number of participants, and treatments, and inclusion-exclusion criteria. So it is well worthwhile undertaking competitive landscape review before starting any project.
Yep. On that same note, how does Alithia leverage its operational expertise to streamline trial startup and closeout processes?
Yeah, so particularly in startup, I think I've mentioned, I can bring it all in terms of working with our networks to particularly reach out and do, first of all, high-level feasibility, secondly, more detailed feasibility, work with our clinical trial networks to put, often these clinical trial networks, in addition to review with TrialKey, can offer us a review of the protocol. And we would, it's very routine for us to review any protocol that we work with, because it's much better to mitigate anything we foresee as an issue for the project, be it an inclusion-exclusion criteria, be it a particular medication that may or may not routinely be used in Australia as standard of care, but we definitely know up front. And then we, I guess, socialize the idea, the concept of a particular trial with those networks, with sites that we've worked with before, and gain a picture about how feasible that project is. We also, I think Minh-Thu has alluded to the fact that on average we have about 20 years industry experience across our operational team. That means that they can foresee, based on their experience and expertise, a lot of the bottlenecks in any project. We always put together a risk management plan. It's a live document that we work with throughout the process of any project. We bring it to our kickoff meeting. We make that part of our team meetings, and everybody is included in the team meetings as well. So throughout, from the start, but throughout the whole process of undertaking any clinical study, we constantly are looking at risk, and we constantly are addressing some of these perceived bottlenecks, not only at the start of the project, but throughout, and trying to mitigate them. So I might leave it there.
Yep. Minh-Thu, what key insights does the full execution report provide to CROs and sponsors after a project is secured?
Thanks, Bernice. So we have the free preliminary report, which I mentioned before, which has the success distribution graph, competitive analysis, and also the technology breakdown. And what that allows our CRO partners like Alithia to do is to go to the sponsor and say, look, this is where we can get your trial from and to. But the reason that we don't do the full execution report at the beginning is there's nothing to stop the sponsor from taking all those insights and going to another CRO. And so what we do is it's sort of like if Alithia wins, we win. So then once they have secured the project, then we would do a full execution report. And that has insights on primary and secondary endpoints. So we use Shapley values, as I mentioned before, and we'll find the exact marginal impact that each endpoint, whether it be primary or secondary, has on the probability of success. And we'll also analyse the patient inclusion and exclusion criteria. And we'll look at age, conditions, diagnoses, tests as well. We might look at if they need inflammatory markers, scans for diagnosis, the best numbers and types for diagnosis tests. And also we might look at, how long since diagnosis. But we really drill down on inclusion and exclusion and find the best criteria. I mentioned before we look at patient enrollment numbers. So this is particularly valuable in those cases where the biostatistician might say, look, there's just a lot of variability. There's a lot of assumptions I have to make in this particular calculation. So we'll help them with that. We'll also look at site numbers and location, patient touch points, frequency and type, which we spoke about before, and trial duration, also time frames for when it's best to measure primary and secondary endpoints. Some more sort of finicky things that we do look at that often can't be changed, might be intervention model or number of arms. That would only be something that we'd look at very, very early on. But pretty much any variable where the probability of success is affected by more than 0.5% will be included in the report as well. So it is quite a comprehensive report, but we'll sit down with our CRO partner and say, look, this is what the data's found. You tell us which of these are feasible, which of these can be done or not.
Important to you, right? Because sometimes
Yeah.
it's that client says, well, thank you very much, but we've got a really experienced board ourselves. We've got experts in this area. We're going to stick with what we want to do, but we have fully informed that client in what we foresee, both from an operational perspective, but also Minh-Thu from a trial key perspective, using all those thousands of variables. But certainly it has often led to us being able to then bring in experts such as biostatisticians, regulatory experts to assess the most important aspects for that client and address them before we even start the project. And that's the most important value proposition. And also, Minh-Thu, you mentioned that we would include, a snapshot at the start of the proposal. And once we win the study, then we provide at no cost to the client the full report. And we start working with them on that as well, as soon as they would like us to. Yeah, that's an important concept as well. Yeah. Thank you.
For both of you, what trends in clinical trials are Alithia and TrialKey jointly addressing to stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, look, I think I can start off by saying that the trend, of course, as has been for a while, is to a couple of trends is to get things done as soon as possible and get them as risk mitigated as possible. And by using, the algorithms and the toolkit, I guess, from TrialKey, we're addressing that head on. And then I guess the other aspect is the trend we're seeing, and I mentioned this a little while ago, is that every single trial we're now involved with is more complex and complicated than it has ever been in terms of the assessments that are collected. But we are seeing amazing and very worthwhile trends, costly, but worthwhile in my opinion, such as wearables. It is a differentiator usually for the product compared to the competitors out there. It means it's 24/7 hour data. It means it's considered a biomarker, I should say. I can't speak this morning. And that is, by regulatory authorities like the FDA are very interested in biomarkers as outcomes for particular trials and products. So we're definitely seeing more complex studies, more biomarkers in terms of aspects like wearables, even the use of phones for completion of diary data, even things like we are now involved with studies where the participants are given a bottle of capsules, and the capsule, the bottle itself will have a little mechanism on it to to remind the participants when they have to take their product, but also that they can't tamper with it, so that if they can't, double up on taking off that product every day. So it's in terms of compliance and getting good quality data. So I might leave it there.
That's fascinating with the bottle. Could I just ask, with that, does it like chime or something?
Yes,
To let the patient know.
Yes.
And then if they
yes.
go to take 2, it'll lock, so they can't
Yes.
have more than one.
Yes.
That's great, because
Yes.
human error would be a huge factor.
Particularly in some, cognitive declined
absolutely.
situations and patient populations. And it's all about, a lot of the studies that we undertake involve carers as well. And that data is just as important as the participants themselves. So we want to get this right from day one, and we want to decrease that patient burden. So all these little additions make it all less patient burden and make the data the best quality it can be that we're collecting.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything Tina said. Wearables, biomarkers, but just something on biomarkers. So there's a lot of artificial intelligence in this space right now. We're seeing it with us, with clinicals, and their operational efficiency. We're seeing a lot of AI in drug discovery, a lot of AI companies in drug discovery, but now also some in helping select the best biomarkers as well. So it's a huge space, and I think companies with an open mind who, we're not saying you have to try it and then use it forever. Try it, see if you like it, especially programs that will integrate into what you're currently doing as well. So let's say like an AI program that's in EDC, in data capture. Try it out, see how it works, your operational efficiency, and go from there. Yeah.
Can I also just add, one of the other trends that we're seeing is actually in the trial design itself. We're seeing more complicated entry into more establishment of the patient population, which is great, because we want to make sure that the exact patient population is being recruited. So that means that there might be a run-in period, there might be a titration period, but even before that, where many of you in the audience who may have been involved in oncology studies, where that very first study that the client might do might be a basket study where they're looking at various different indications because they're not quite sure exactly what type of oncology indication that product will be best suited for. We're now seeing that basket design be introduced into other therapeutic areas. So yeah, we're seeing little trends in those other areas as well.